Sideline Squib. It's a long time coming. Steve, Andrew, what say you? This is the sideline, huh? Yeah. Funny, it's my time then. Put me in right now then. Squib, 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 boy. This is the sideline, huh? Funny, it's my time then. Yeah. Put me in right now then. Squib, 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 boy. This is the Squib, info stick up to your ribs. Chips be coming with that dip. Go ahead, put it to your lips. My oh my, that is delish. Victory gon' taste like this. Y'all bought that big old boat, but these boys built you a bridge. Sit down and take notes. If you want you a trophy.
What's up, everybody? It is Andrew with Do or Dynasty and Sideline Squib here live with Drake Jordan, otherwise known as Dynasty Champ 1. He's a veteran high-stakes dynasty football player for 16 years, a three-time high-stakes champion, and the creator of the Johnson score. His article is coming soon, so stay tuned. Drake, how are you doing?
Hey, not too bad, man. How's it going?
Not bad, not bad. I'm happy to have you on. Obviously, we've had some heavy hitters on our show before, and it's one of those things where anytime you can bring on a champion like yourself into the show, we always want to get that kind of experience to our listeners and to our viewers. And so we're really, really happy to have you on. And I just want to kind of pick your brain a little bit on some of your strategies, some of the things you're looking forward to in the 2020 season, and then kind of go over some of the things that you're working on. I know that you're in a FFPC league as well, so we can kind of touch on that. But without getting too far down the line here, we want to talk a little bit of player news before we get into the show. I know you're hip to the Twitter wire. What did you think about Raheem Mostert asking for a trade after not getting paid?
Raheem Mostert asked for a trade. Well, I really don't pay attention to players that don't matter, so that's cool. Good for him. I'm sure that he could be a great special teamer somewhere. Really wasn't drafting him because I'm good at fantasy, so good for him.
Yeah, so he's getting paid special teams player money because he's an undrafted running back who was signed to be a special teams player, but ended up playing because the two running backs in front of him got injured, and he ended up finding himself in the Super Bowl. So he decided he wanted to get paid, and then whenever he didn't get paid, he now wants to be traded. It is July 11th. Mini camps and training camps are about to kick off. We have coronavirus, which is keeping people from even, getting in groups and practicing together. But yeah, he wants to go find another team to play for, I guess, and learn a new system in the next couple of weeks in order to make an impact and then get paid again at the end of the season. So it seems like a really, really sound strategy for someone who's, an undrafted running back who, is not like a spring chicken by any stretch of the imagination. So it seems like an odd timing for him to be asking something like that.
Yeah, one positive of a canceled season is that people wouldn't have to come face to face with the embarrassment that they drafted Raheem Mostert before the 7th round. So they'd have that going for them at least.
That's a good point. They wouldn't have to face the reality of being bad at drafting, in dynasty startups, redraft, any of those kind of things. That's a really good point, and it kind of leads me into one of my first questions here for you. What do you think makes a three-time champion? What's the most important part of being a good dynasty fantasy football player? Do you think it's drafting well, like you mentioned, or do you think it's making trades in season, or is it all about the waiver wire?
Really, it's just about not fucking up in general. So, to be honest, it's almost too easy when you have people that are out here talking about how Raheem Mostert is going to be a league winner when you draft him in the 7th round. But beyond that, when you're not surrounded by that many people, which is rare that are doing that, it's all about the draft. If you're doing a startup, if you mess that up, you're pretty much done for the next couple years. It's really hard to rebuild. Hit rates on rookie picks aren't strong. Sometimes in the first round they are, but if you start off a dynasty draft without very many assets, you're setting yourself back 3 to 4 years at the very least before you're going to be able to turn it around.
So then you could just start your dynasty in a rebuild. And that seems to be a very common strategy by people. lately, at least.
Yeah. What's funny is you pretty much need a good mix of, established starters and youth. If you go all the way to one end of the spectrum, that's usually how you end up getting yourself in trouble. Going all in on rookies, especially in a startup, which we could talk about it later probably, but in my FFPC draft, I ended up doing that a little bit just because that's where the value was. But that's really how you end up with a pretty volatile team, which can be good or bad depending on the circumstances.
Yeah, I've always kind of taken the approach to, especially in the Scott Fish Bowl, for example, when you're going up against 1,400 other people, and DFS especially as well, like just kind of giving, merging them all together, dynasty, redraft, big tournaments like that, and then obviously DFS type stuff, that you have to kind of embrace the variance, right? You have to embrace a little bit of the chance. If you draft strictly off of ADP, nothing's going to look really that. You're not going to be that contrarian, right? So you're going to have a pretty basic roster, and you're probably going to compete. And if things fall your way, then things work out, and you find yourself in the playoffs, and who knows what happens from there. But I think at least in dynasty startups, you need to be a little bit contrarian to help yourself not only compete initially, but also put yourself over the top and be a champion, be somebody who's in the finals or defending a title each year. You got to take a little bit of a chance, So for me, at least in the Scott Fish Bowl, for example, I think that's something I've definitely tried to do. At least somewhere in these middle rounds, is just try to take some shots at some guys that are, if they fall on their face or they start off slow or those kind of things, then I finish where I finish. Nobody remembers second place. If you end up winning the whole thing, then who knows? It's one of those things where you just kind of have to embrace a little bit of the variance. So I agree. I think that the dynasty startup, the draft, I think is one of the most important things, if not the most important thing, to at least start yourself off on the right foot and compete right out of the gate. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah, when it comes to a tournament like the Scott Fish Bowl, where you're facing 1,400 other people, I pretty much have no interest in drafting a safe team. If it was, if things were as simple as following the average draft position of every player, then it'd be pretty easy for everyone to have a good team. That's not going to happen. For my strategy, I'm just trying to get the highest ceiling team possible. I need to beat 1,400 people. So I have no interest in drafting a safe team whatsoever. I'm going to swing for the fences, and if I lose, I lose.
Yeah, and just looking over your team, it looks at least a little similar on the surface from the ceiling aspect of things. Like, we both have Josh Allen. I think he's going to be one of the most volatile, most polarizing players in the tournament, just based on the scoring that everyone has talked about at length at this point. So I'm not going to bore anyone with that. But obviously, taking sacks, throwing incompletions is something that's going to drastically impact your weekly score. But his rushing floor, his rushing touchdowns, and now the addition of Stephon Diggs, if he improves a little bit in the completion percentage standpoint, we could be looking at somebody who, week in, week out, is somebody that we can at least trust to put in our starting lineup. So I think taking that ceiling of Josh Allen or taking that risk of Josh Allen is something that I've put in my roster, and it looks like you've done as well. Obviously, you have Patrick Mahomes, which that kind of helps buoy the situation a bit. Who knows what happens there? He's got a pretty safe floor, but again, his ceiling is maybe the highest of anyone, especially at quarterback position, outside of Lamar Jackson from the rushing standpoint. It looks like you have Austin Eckler, you got Kareem Hunt, a little Josh Jacobs, Damian Williams, so quarterback running back stack there. Where are you on that? As a Chiefs fan, I kind of find myself maybe even in the minority, but I do think Damian Williams is going to be the back to own at least through the first half of the season in Kansas City. Are you in the same boat there, or are you on the CEH train?
Well, when it comes to price, it's definitely Damian Williams. I don't really think it's a question.
Absolutely.
If CEH was on the board in the second round when it was my turn to draft in the Scott Fish Bowl, I might have taken him because he said I'm going for the most volatile team possible. But when it comes to most leagues, CEH is probably going to be a fade for me. Damian Williams is good, And like you see here in this tournament, I got him in the 9th round. So if CEH, if he's not good or he gets hurt or something, I mean, Damian Williams could be a league winner. That's what I was looking for there. I mean, dude had a case to be Super Bowl MVP last year. He's not just going to go away. It's not just going to be as simple as CEH stepping in and they're not going to give him a full workload. I don't even know if he has the skills to do that. So Damian Williams isn't going anywhere at all.
That's what I've been preaching, basically since draft day. I really didn't expect the Chiefs to draft the first round running back, to be honest. I think CEH kind of fell in their lap. I do think he fits their system, fits Andy Reid, fits what he would be trying to do. But from a fantasy aspect, I just don't see that with Damian Williams being there. I just don't see that there's going to be enough volume for Edwards-Helaire to really make a dramatic impact in 2020. I do think beyond that, there's obviously the potential of that being the case, but at least right now, and especially given our current situation with limited practice time and limited interaction with coaches and teams, I think it's going to be very difficult for these rookies, especially running backs, to come in and make an immediate impact, especially when they're not maybe even the number one in their depth chart going into the season. So I do think it'd be a couple weeks at least before CEH is making those kind of rounds, and that might be the time to make those trades in startups and redrafts, where people kind of are quick to bail out on a situation. And if you have the ability to kind of wait it out for CEH to be used more, or any player in that regard who starts slow, that's the time to kind of capitalize and make a trade and get him for less than what you would have got him for 6 weeks before that. So. In regards to what I'm doing here in the Scott Fish Bowl, I'm looking, like I mentioned, Josh Allen. I had Dak Prescott in the first round. I do think he has a unlimited weaponry right now. I mean, he has the rushing game here with Ezekiel Elliott, and then they added CeeDee Lamb, obviously Amari Cooper whenever he's not facing a number one corner, and then also they have Michael Gallup. I'm a big fan of Michael Gallup as well. So I do think that Dak has got at least some weapons to work with and a pretty high floor at the quarterback position. And then I took some stabs, man. I'm not a big Todd Gurley fan. I'm pretty anti-Todd Gurley. Something about arthritic knees by the age of 25 gives me I don't really like it. But in this tournament and in redraft, I think it's at least worth a shot, considering there's no one in that backfield, right? There's nobody there.
Yeah, he hasn't had a physical yet, but I'm sure it's fine. I just want to say before you move on, as far as Dak goes, the Cowboys offense could be the best in the NFL this year.
Could be.
When you're just talking about offensive weapons, and I mean Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup, plus Zeke coming out of the backfield, if they score as much or more than the Chiefs, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, and they have with maybe the best offensive line in football. I definitely would be in the conversation of the best offensive line in football. So, keeping Dak upright and creating running lanes for Ezekiel Elliott is going to be really impressive. So it should be really impressive. And for the most part, everybody's back, right? The same core group of guys coming right back from last year, and they were clicking on high cylinders last year as well. And now they just added who I think is the best wide receiver in the 2020 class in CeeDee Lamb. And, I think that that's something that can only benefit Dak and that whole offense, So Blake Jarwin's season is going to have to probably wait another couple of years. So,
yeah, overall, considering what's going on this year as far as the offseason goes, where there's been no mini camp, training camp might happen in a couple weeks, it might not. Overall, we should be buying more into offenses that are returning a lot of personnel compared to teams that are going through a lot of changes. So, like you said, with as many people as the Cowboys are returning, they're definitely an offense that should probably get the benefit of the doubt over a couple other situations. Yeah,
and the Chiefs would be an example of that as well, with they're returning 20 of the 22 starters on both sides of the football. So obviously the same coaching staff, everything's the same system, same everything. And then you add in some of the new rookies on the defensive side of the ball, and as well as obviously Clyde Edwards-Helaire. It seems to be another safe offense to be buying into. So, with that, I feel confident going into 2020 as long as there is a season. I feel comfortable in my team being able to at least compete for another Super Bowl. Obviously, winning the division, comes first, and then you see where things go in the playoffs. But all things considered, I'm very comfortable with where the Chiefs are headed, at least in 2020, as long as there is a season. Patrick Mahomes signed a big deal the other day, so I think what a common misconception is, and just to kind of talk about solidifying an offense and those kind of things, and just kind of keeping with the norm. The only thing that's going to be different is Patrick Mahomes is making a lot more money, right? But what a lot of people don't understand is he didn't get paid yet. He didn't get paid yesterday. It wasn't like he got paid like $503 million when he signed a piece of paper. It's not how that works. So I just think people are really, really like, I think people make too big of an overreaction to a big number. But you got to remember it's over 10 years. You got to understand like when that money gets kicked in, when it actually hits his bank account, when it becomes effective to the cap. He's still going to be one of the lowest paid starting quarterbacks in football next year because of just how it works. He did make $10 million when he signed the contract, but as far as the salary cap hit, they're in great shape when it comes to his performance on the field compared to what he's getting paid. So I think people need to kind of chill out with the whole now how are they going to be able to afford everyone else? Well, newsflash, people take pay cuts to win championships. That's just how it works. Anyway, so I want to roll into something I think is kind of fun. It kind of allows people to get an idea of who you are, right? And just kind of loosen things up a bit here. And I want to kind of do some rapid fire. You had no opportunity to prepare for any of these questions. So I want everybody to understand that, right? So only one of them is a fantasy type question. Everything else is going to be very pop culture or, personal preference. So yes, I am judging you, as are everyone else. So be selective in your answers here, okay?
Bring it, man.
All right, I'm gonna hit you with the first one right off the top. Does pineapple go on pizza?
No.
Oh no. Man, you missed it. -1 already. Goodness gracious, man. Well, good news is you have a chance to make it up. Favorite superhero, and there's only one wrong answer, so you have a really good chance of making the right selection. Favorite superhero.
Honestly, it's 2020, man. It's time to wave the superheroes goodbye. They're canceled.
That is, you can't cop out. You can't cop out. You have to have an answer.
I paid for tickets for like 30 superhero movies in the past 10 years. I'm ready for a break. I mean, it's Batman.
Batman. All right, good answer. The only wrong answer for those listening in at home, and for anyone that comes on the show later, you can have a correct answer. The only wrong answer here is Spider-Man. It's the only answer. He's not a superhero. He's not a superhero. Just kidding. Well, for all you Spider-Man like lovers and backers, I'm just kidding. Don't come.
Not to spoil the newest movie, but I mean, Spider-Man has access to a worldwide defense system now, so that series kind of jumped the shark.
Well, he needs it. I'll put it that way. Yeah. All right. Next, really, really important question, and there's really no wrong answer here. So I'm gonna you kind of get a break, but The Office or Parks and Rec?
It's The Office. I mean, Parks and Rec. It's a little bit too much for me. Pretty much, if you have to, summarize every single episode of Parks and Rec, it's Leslie does something stupid, and then she apologizes for it. It was good for the first couple seasons, but once we hit season 5, and it's still the same thing over and over again, it got kind of old.
I'd agree with that. Now, would you say Ron Swanson or Michael Scott?
As far as TV characters go, I gotta go Michael Scott.
Really. So I'm a big Ron Swanson fan. I didn't think I'd ever put somebody over Michael Scott, but I do think Ron Swanson just makes that show. So I do think there's some episodes of The Office that are kind of buoyed by Jim or someone else in the roster. I think most episodes of Parks and Rec, if they're any good, Ron Swanson plays a major part in it. So anyway, so it's just kind of a follow-up add-in question. All right, here's the fantasy relevant air quoted question here. Is Tom Brady a system quarterback?
No, Tom Brady's good.
You think it's good? You think it's okay?
I mean, if he was a system, I mean, systems usually only. No, he's not a system quarterback. When you're talking about being consistently good for 19, 18 years, he's proved that he's not a system quarterback. Yeah. I know that's a meme, but yeah,
I do think it's pretty funny, but I agree. As much as it is for me to admit, Tom Brady is good. He's a very good quarterback. He's gonna have a lot of records by the end of it. Whenever he decides that he's done, whenever he's done collecting a paycheck, he just by sheer compiling of stats, he'll own a ton of them, and then by efficiency, obviously, he'll have plenty of those as well. So you start counting rings and all that shit too. So I understand he is one of the best, if not the best, quarterback of all time. But it is funny to ask that question because he wasn't a system for a really, really long time. We're gonna find out though. It's a really good situation to be in on either side of the fence. So like if Tom Brady is really good in Tampa Bay, then Bill Belichick is just he rode the coattails of Tom Brady. And if Tom Brady isn't good in Tampa Bay and the Patriots are good, then everybody gets to shift their focus to how Tom Brady isn't that good, and it's all about Bill Belichick. So either way, we have a talking point. It works out.
I mean, people forget. I mean, Bill Belichick went 10-6 with Matt Castle, and I think that was 2008. So I think he already answered that question. But fantasy gamers are pretty much saying that they don't believe that Tom Brady's a system quarterback because Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are both going in the top 3 rounds of redraft leagues. So clearly they think he is much more than a system quarterback, even though I don't know. Again, that's one of those things where they're betting on how old is he now, 43 years old.
Something like that.
I mean, at the end of the day, he's a free agent coming off of or coming to a new team where there's been no off season. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out down there. Typical logic would tell me that I should fade the situation, but people aren't doing that.
It's very true. And in your experience, I know you've been doing this for 16 years. You're a 3-time champion. So I kind of put a lot of stock into what you have to say here, but who would you prefer? And just speaking from 2020 standpoint, I think everybody would lean Godwin in a dynasty format. But just in 2020, would you prefer Mike Evans or Chris Godwin?
In 2020, it's Chris Godwin. I don't really think that there's I don't want to say that there's not much of a question about it, but when you're talking about play style, Chris Godwin's skill set lines up much more along the lines of what Tom Brady has dealt with in the last couple years. So I would say it's probably Chris Godwin.
Okay. Yeah, and I would agree with you. I just think it's sheer talent-wise. I think Chris Godwin does more on a more efficient basis than Mike Evans is going to do. Mike Evans is much more of a volume kind of guy, and he's going to need the deep ball and things like that. So I think they both play a role, and they both definitely have fantasy value, obviously. But I think Chris Godwin is the one to own if you have to pick between one or two. And I have plenty of shares of Godwin because I've been faced with that, making a decision on which one I would rather have. And I've made a decision pretty heavily on Chris Godwin and crossing my fingers. All right, so moving forward here, speaking of trying to rank some guys and trying to put some guys in some orders that might be in a similar tier. I gave you a little bit of a heads up here and wanted to give you time to prepare a little bit. But I'm sure you already had a working list already in regards to ranking some of the running backs going into this season. And we can talk about dynasty alone, but they're all very similar in age and should be very similar in ranking regardless from a dynasty standpoint or just in 2020, just because of shelf life of a running back, right? So I wanted you to rank the following running backs for 2020. Miles Sanders, Joe Mixon, Alvin Kamara, Ezekiel Elliott, or Dalvin Cook. Just kind of put that in a little bit of an order. If you were to be drafting and you got the next 5 picks, what order would you have drafted them in?
There's one guy in here that's in a tier all of his own, and it's Ezekiel Elliott. That dude, the way that he plays Call of Duty when he's completely and utterly faded is impressive as hell. And if he brings that kind of energy into a post-COVID NFL, dude's just going to light it up. They said because of the reasons we talked about before, the Cowboys offense is in contention to be the absolute best in the NFL this year. And they have a good schedule when it comes to their offense. So it's him. And then everyone else is in a tier below that. So when it comes to number 2, this is, I think, a lot closer than people realize. I'm going Kamara at number 2, but I think Joe Mixon is right there with him. Joe Mixon is produced despite a lot of things that have been working against him in the last year or two, especially last year. But this year, when I'm drafting players, I'm basically looking at a range of outcomes for them. And when it comes to Joe Mixon's range of outcomes, he could be one of the best running back in the NFL this year. It all depends on if Joe Burrow is good.
Weird. A lot of eyes on that quarterback in this situation.
Yeah. Joe Burrow, he may be 30 years old, but he did have a pretty good season last year with LSU. So if he is as half as good in the NFL as he was in college, Joe Mixon is going to be an RB1.
I think we lost you, or did I lose you?
I still hear you. You hear me? Can you hear me?
And now, headphones died on me, so you're gonna go from you're going now to laptop speakers. So,
okay, all right. So, am I good?
You're good. I can hear you now. Okay. So you were talking about Mixon and Joe Burrow putting up a pretty good numbers last year. He was 30 years old. Along those lines, that's basically where I lost you.
Yeah. So I mean, he was clowning kids that are 10 years younger than him, but. He might be good despite that fact.
He was smoking a cigar, so he's old enough to smoke cigars, so that's good.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. Most people that play
the start of a good quarterback right there.
Yeah. So yeah, like I said, when I'm looking at range of outcomes, Joe Burrow might be good. Joe Mixon's only 23 years old, I believe. There's a lot of room for him to grow and take another step. So he's right there with Kamara in my mind. Next up is Sanders. Miles Sanders is fucking good, man. Miles Sanders, people keep tweeting out these Doug Peterson running back splits, but I don't even know who was the running back before in Philly? Was it Jordan Howard? I don't even remember. I don't remember. Miles Sanders is fucking good. And when you're depending on coaching tendencies for situations that don't really apply to the present day, that's usually when you're just overthinking things. It really doesn't have to be that hard. And drafting Miles Sanders is just an easy decision to make. But yeah, then there's Dalvin Cook. Obviously, he has the holdout situation going. I'm operating on the assumption that he'll play. I think he's up there with Sanders too, but if I was on the clock in the middle or end of the first round, I'm probably going Miles Sanders over him.
So you think that the Miles Sanders ADP somewhere in the 9, 10, 11 range is accurate as far as dynasty startups go?
Dynasty startups, yeah. I mean, you got to swing for the fences, and I think that like I said, he's really good. I know that a lot of people got burnt by him because he didn't produce as much in the first half of the season because he was splitting time with Jordan Howard. But that's what you get whenever you draft rookie running backs in seasonal leagues. You take a reach on them in the mid-range rounds, and you're hoping that you are hitting on a guy that's going to give you first round production in the second half of the season. That's why drafting Clyde Edwards-Helaire is so risky. Typically when you draft rookie running backs, not to change the subject because I think it's related, but typically the allure of drafting rookie running backs is that you do get that ceiling potential on round picks in the 4th to 6th round range. With Clyde Edwards-Helaire, his ceiling is already built into his cost. That's pretty risky. If you miss on some people are drafting him early second, early third. If you miss on that, you might not make the playoffs. So that's a really risky move to make, drafting him so high. I think he just got muted.
I did just get
muted.
I swear to God, I've done this before.
You're good, man.
Yeah, I think the cost is built into the cost is built into the ADP there. So the ceiling is built into the cost a bit. So I do think that you're right with Miles Sanders, getting him in the 109, 110, 111, whatever it may be. I think that's at least where he's at. He's going into the second year of the system. There's nobody behind him in regards to touches and stuff. It's very different than Clyde Edwards-Helaire, just a handful of picks later. And he's a rookie running back going into a system where there's obviously going to be a learning curve. And then he's also got Damian Williams, obviously. So I think there's a lot to be concerned about when you're spending that kind of capital on something like that. But to your point in regards to, but what about Doug Peterson's usage of running backs? First off, he hasn't had a Miles Sanders yet in his coaching careers, and definitely not in Philadelphia. He had Jordan Howard last year. So there is some of that where when just a trusted handoff, a trusted guy to hand the ball off to in that offense, and you kind of ease Miles Sanders in. But in previous years, we were talking about him using, you got 2018 Wendell Smallwood, Adams, Corey Clement, then you had Clement and Smallwood and LeGarrette Blount the year before. Obviously Sproles, Matthews, and not the good Sproles, a very aging Sproles. Matthews and Smallwood in 2016. So it's like, yeah, the splits are obviously going to be more, spread out because those are all different skill set running backs. Miles Sanders is definitely a 3-down back and definitely one that can be catching the ball out of the backfield. I do agree with your assessment, I think, in regards to this order. I think Zeke is definitely in the tier above. I think just because of sheer volume and the offensive line talent that he's going to have and just kind of the workload that he's obviously shown to be able to handle. Alvin Kamara, obviously, I think his 2019 is going to be an outlier when we all look back at the overall landscape of his fantasy career. I think 2019 will be an outlier in regards to production. I think he'll be more towards a double-digit touchdowns versus the sub-5 touchdowns on a season. Joe Mixon, I think, is the wild card. I think he could definitely be the best running back in 2020. And then you're 100% right. It 100% lands on Joe Burrow's shoulders. How efficient, how effective is that offense? If it proves to be that Joe Burrow is not very good, then a lot of attention then goes to Joe Mixon, and now we're back to where we were last year with Andy Dalton. So I'm in agreement. And then Dalvin Cook, I don't think is even in the conversation, to be honest. I don't trust a shoulder injury that continues to be recurring. They have a loaded backfield. I know Alexander Madison and Mike Boone are both very talented running backs. I don't think they have any issues using both of them. And if it becomes an issue for Dalvin Cook with his shoulder, I think that's going to continue to be popping up throughout the year. That's a lot of equity be spending in a startup or in a redraft on a running back that could be down 2 or 3 weeks because they're limiting his usage, or they're not using him at the same high volume that we would need him to be producing at or being used at throughout the season. So I just think Dalvin Cook is definitely further down the list than even 5. So I agree with most of your assessment there is basically what I'm saying.
That's right, man. There's a reason why I'm the champ. I expect you to agree.
Exactly. We're all just trying to get to your level, Jake. That's it. We're just trying to get to your level. 3-time champion. We all want to be invited to be pros versus Joes here in the FFPC. I know that's part of what you've got going on. You want to kind of touch on that a bit? I want to pull up your draft board if you don't mind. I'm going to let the viewers see what you got going on as far as your draft, and you can kind of talk about your thought process behind it and kind of what a pros versus Joes, what kind of preparation you had going into that.
Yeah, sure. So I'm just going to break it down for people that are, just being introduced to me today. First of all, there's high stakes leagues, which I am a part of. Then there's quote unquote high stakes leagues. And then there's, your office leagues. So 98% of people are in office leagues. There's 1% that are in quote unquote high stakes leagues. And then there's 0.01% that are in high stakes leagues. I'm in the 0.01%. Okay. I'm pretty rare. You don't really see people like me walking around the streets. But then again, there's the quote unquote high stakes leagues, and the FFPC is pretty much home to a lot of these guys. What we have here is I was invited to be kind of just bumped down a tier just once to give people a taste of what it's like to face, a champion like me, and then a pros versus Joes matchup. So, there's a couple people in here that people might be familiar with, ffmastermind.com, dynastydraftroom.com, Bro to Fantasy, FF Mastermind, Fantasy Mojo, and then from Sharp Football Analysis, Rich Rebar. So they put 6 pros, what they're calling it, although I'd say 5 pros, 1 high stakes champion, and then 6 Joes. So the Joes are all FFPC players that have previous experience in FFPC Dynasty League. So basically, it's all just about putting us all in a league together and then just seeing what happens. So it was a pretty fun. As you can see, if you're just looking over this draft board, if you're online right now, FFPC is in a tight end premium format. So that's why you're seeing guys like Kittle and Kelsey go in the first round. And there's also a huge premium on running backs. So having never played in the FFPC before, it was interesting to see that play out in real time because I hadn't ever seen it before. But pretty much everyone in this draft room wanted a tight end and they wanted a workhorse running back. I pivoted a bit. I started my draft off with Tyreek Hill and DJ Moore. Had to rectify that later on by trading Tyreek Hill over for the aforementioned Joe Mixon and Mike Gesicki. But it was a good time, It's nice to see how the common folk play high stakes, what they consider to be high stakes, at least a little bit of a different pace for me. But it's interesting. If you lose this league, that's it. It's just fine. You just got to pay another $250 next year to play. Doesn't really seem like high stakes to me, but hey, to each his own,
Yeah, relative, right? High stakes is relative.
My high stakes definitely not.
I do like the approach though to pivot, and we've seen that even with the Scott Fish Bowl and some of the the eliminators and things like that have been hosted by John Bosch and like I said with the Scott Fish Bowl is that everybody is definitely clamoring over the running back, and there's some people that were going 0 wide receiver even through the 4th round. So there is that. But what that does is that opens up the opportunity to pivot, right? It does open up the opportunity to, find yourself some value at wide receiver and find yourself some value at tight end or other positions to kind of help. I hate to be the guy at the end of the run, right? I want to start a new run. So if I'm drafting and I see 7 running backs go in front of me, I'm not going to just take the 8th best running back now because even with my highest graded wide receiver still on the board, at that point, I'm going to take talent over just trying to fit in with the rest of the crowd here. Like we talked about earlier with variance and trying to win leagues as opposed to just competing in them. If you want to win, you got to find your advantages. And so if people are taking the advantage and taking the route of loading up the running back, then you need to pivot and find another advantage, find assets elsewhere that you can kind of build your team around and fill in later, backfill later. So I'm all for that. And it looks like, as a 3-time champion yourself, it seems like you were able to think on your feet in the middle of the draft and find yourself some value with Tyreek Hill and then able to flip Tyreek Hill into a stud running back just like that. Joe Mixon was off the board when Tyreek Hill was drafted by you, and you ended up still able to acquire him, later on after post draft. So that's good work from a 3-time champion, and I'm proud of you for making those adjustments in draft and then post draft. That's good stuff.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. One thing I want to say, just like when you're dealing with specialty formats like this, I found that it's easy to just keep on with your board and say that I'm not going to draft tight end early, like in these premium formats, or I'm not going to draft quarterback early. Yeah, like, in like the Scott Fish Bowl, where a lot of people, just regardless of the fact that it's super flex, just don't want to draft a quarterback early. But I found that you gotta have to meet them halfway. If you don't, that's how you end up with guys like Dawson Knox as your starting tight end, where if you just stick to your board, you don't go out of the way, you can end up screwing yourself pretty bad. So luckily for me, I stuck to my board, ended up with the greatest tight end of all time in the 9th round, Rob Gronkowski. So it worked out pretty well for me, but still something to keep in mind.
You got Rob Gronkowski in the Scott Fish Bowl?
No, sorry, that was talking about the FFPC in this one. Yeah.
Who's your tight end in the Scott Fish Bowl right now? Who have you drafted one?
Darren Waller. So
Darren Waller. So he's pretty good.
Yeah. So overall, I think Darren Waller is likely to be a fade. He got a lot of targets last year. It's going to be tough for him to do that again, but there are a few things that are going in his favor. One, like we mentioned before, they have a lot of rookies coming into that offense with Bryan Edwards, Lynn Bowden, who I guess is actually a running back now, and obviously Henry Ruggs. But my thinking when I went with him was, again, there's pretty much been no offseason for these guys. Carr and Waller obviously had a pretty good connection, and without an offseason, they're probably going to be leaning on that again. So I think the Waller may have one really top tight end season left in him before reality comes knocking. And he only scored, I think, like 3 touchdowns last year. So if he can even just keep up, most of the targets that he got last year, plus scoring a couple more touchdowns, and he's easily going to return value in 2020.
I'd agree with that. It's a good assessment in regards to, I do think Darren Waller in most instances is a fade just at his price, and everything you just touched on. The target share theoretically should be limited or reduced compared to what it was last year. But you're right. With the continuity between the quarterback and him, you should see at least early on in the season at least a return on that. So I think it's a good assessment. And you kind of back that up again with Jared Cook too, right? You got Jared Cook with, steady Eddie when it comes to tight ends. He just continues to perform. He continues to be a reliable target for Drew Brees when he's not throwing it to Michael Thomas 75 times a game. He's finding Jared Cook underneath, and Jared Cook's able to do some things with the football. So I think that's a good situation to find yourself at tight end. I've waited on tight end. I just drafted my first tight end here in the most recent pick, and I went with Chris Herndon. And I just think it's one of those things where, 2 years ago, Chris Herndon would have been going, in the first 3 rounds. But because of injuries and Adam Gase, we're looking at a situation where Chris Herndon is an afterthought. He's a wide receiver. He's a tight end with a receiving ability of a wide receiver. He can line up anywhere. He's a dangerous red zone threat. He's a guy who can catch the ball over the middle. And he's one of those. He's a returning piece to that offense, if you want to call it an offense at this point. But somebody's going to have to catch the football there. Jameson Crowder, Denzel Mims being the new guy there. They lost Robbie Anderson, and now they've got maybe hopefully there's going to be some sort of connection there with Sam Darnold and Chris Herndon, and so I'm embracing the variance. I'm embracing the chance that he flops on his face, and then that's okay. That's the team I've built. That I've built it through wide receivers and with my Miles Sanders and my Dak Prescott, and so I had to wait on tight end. I can't get everybody. So at this point, I took my highest ceiling guy I could possibly find this late in the game. So I went with Chris Herndon.
Yeah, as recently as last year, Herndon was the guy that people were holding for a month when he wasn't playing. So. Yep. There's probably something there. This fantasy community does pretty stupid things most of the time, like we talked about earlier. But when it comes to Herndon, I do think there is something there, especially when you talk about that price.
I believe it's like I think we're in the 10th or 11th round here, so I'm somewhere in that spot. Let's see, we're in 14th round, so I took him in the 13th. I'm the next pick up here in the 14th. So. There wasn't much left on the board, to be honest, at tight end. Virtually everybody's gone at this point. We're looking at backups now outside of Chris Herndon and some older guys. So, I took my shot and I went with it. In how many Scott Fish Bowls have you been in? Is this your first as well, or how many have you been in? I'm sorry if I'm ignorant on that, but I just don't know how many you've been in.
Oh no, this is my first one. So
okay.
Yeah, this is the first time I signed up. I'm sure I could have gotten into every Scott Fish Bowl that I wanted to. But, first one for me.
Yeah, you stick to the high stakes. I understand this is a charity tournament, obviously. So I'm not saying that you're above charity, but you got to focus your attention to the high stakes leagues. But have you found a charity that you're going to go ahead and donate to? You want to kind of give some love to that charity, or are you still looking for a charity that you're trying to make your donation for?
Well, Fantasy Cares is an obvious one, but there's so many people in need right now, so many different causes you can donate to. So I'd say you just go with what hits home for you. And if you don't have the money to donate to charity, the easiest thing you could do is just wear a mask out in public.
That would be very helpful. If I don't think people really understand that you're not actually getting one surgically attached to your face. You are able to remove it after you're not in the store. But for everyone else around you, they would appreciate you not wearing or would appreciate you wearing a mask. It would help, just everybody feel a little bit better, a little bit safer, and maybe we can actually get sports back. That'd be kind of cool. So I'm gonna kind of let this roll out here. I'm gonna give you an opportunity to open the floor here to kind of anything that you want to promote, anything that you are working on. I know that you got an article coming out soon. I know that you're working with the FFPC, those kind of things. But is there anything that you wanted to kind of touch on or get the name out or anything? Is there? I'll give you a layup here. Something I want to kind of start doing on this show on Sideline Squib. We built our community around Twitter for the most part. I mean, obviously we've had some Facebook engagement. We've found some people that are, in just on Apple Podcasts and things like that have become listeners and stuff. But for the most part, Twitter is the core group, and we want to give a shout out to somebody that you should be following on Twitter. Is there somebody that you should be following on Twitter that can kind of get the Drake Jordan stamp of approval?
If there's anyone I could say that would get the Drake Jordan stamp of approval, I'd say let's go with the Fantasy Football Hustle. These guys are at FF Hustle. If you guys aren't listening to the Sideline Squib, this is also a good fantasy football podcast to check out. If only for the fact that I stop by there every once in a while. So that's a pretty good reason to listen, but they've got some good content on there. They just started posting some new graphics and everything. So if you like your analytics with the side of more conventional fantasy analysts, it's probably a good show for you to check out. Again, that's at FF Hustle.
Perfect. That's exactly what I was looking for. Just somebody that that you trust or a podcast that you like to listen to, any of those kind of things. I just want to try to bring some exposure to some people that otherwise wouldn't, that are producing some good content and just aren't, their follower count just isn't what it should be. And for me, a longtime follower for myself is Phil Pennington Jr., Dynasty Phil Dog, at Dynasty Phil Dog. He's a guy out in Delaware, just grinding along, working his tail off, but he's producing amazing content for Dynasty nerds. He's somebody I can ping ideas off of and always try to kind of get an idea of where he would stand, what kind of decisions he would make given the same situation. And he's always been very responsive and engaging in every way. So if you're not already following Phil, you should at Dynasty Phil Dog on Twitter. Well, Drake, I do really appreciate you coming on, man. I really do. The listeners and the viewers are obviously enamored by your accolades, and we're all trying to get to where you are as a 3-time champion. So, we're all just trying to. So it's a pleasure to have you on. Is what I'm trying to get to. So thank you very much, man. And if you need anything from us at Sideline Squib, please don't hesitate. We'll promote whatever we can promote for you. We can get you back on here. We can follow your lead if that's all we need to do.
Hey, appreciate you having me on, man. It means a lot.
Yeah, man. Well, for that, guys, I will go ahead and end this broadcast. If you haven't checked out our website already, it is at sidelinesquib.com. And if our podcasts are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that good stuff, Podbean, all that good stuff. So if you could give us a follow on Twitter at Sideline Squib. And with that, I'll go ahead and send you on your way.